Okay, let's take a look at the passive voice. Actually, Greek has three voices in its verbs. There's an active voice, which most of us learn first. The active voice talks about the things that the subject does. I do, you play, he reads. The passive voice, and the reasons for it will be given later in a different slideshow. The passive voice talks about things that could be done. I am seen. It is heard. You are washed, or something like that. Um, and there are also words that look like they're passive, but are actually active. And we'll get into those a different time. So for now, let's look at the present tense, verbs that are passive or appear to be passive. So most of the verbs covered in the early levels of modern Greek follow the familiar conjugation pattern o, is, I, ome, ete, un. So for example, a verb like pleno, I wash. We would say pleno, plenis, you wash, pleni, he, she, or it washes, plenume, we wash, plenete, you all wash, plenun, they wash. The passive voice looks very similar to it, and you can see it here on the right side. It's plenome. Plenome, I am washed, or I am being washed. Now, the structure here is not all that different. Um, Although most of the verbs that we've learned have been regular, one important one that is irregular is ime, I am. And ime is really important in understanding the middle and passive voice verbs, like the ones on the right, the one on the right, plenome, because it's actually inside the verb. It's actually part of it. And without it, we couldn't make it. I'm going to show you some examples. Ome verbs can often be understood as a middle or passive voice. That is, they talk about things that a subject does to himself or herself, or that are done to someone. So let's take a look at an example here. And we'll start with the verb grafo, which means I write. And you can see I've got the stem, the red part up there, the part that isn't going to change for the most part. So grafo is I write. And when we want to build a normal present tense active verb, we're going to just take our stem right here, graf, and I've got it here 6 times because we'll need it for the 6 persons. I, you, he, she, it. And then the plurals, we, you, all, they. And we bring our endings in, the very familiar endings that we've had for a long time, ever since we've started with verbs. And we have grafo, grafis, grafi, grafume, grafete, grafun. I write or I am writing, you write or you are writing, and so on. Well, to make the passive voice, we're really going to follow the same pattern. We're going to start with graf again, and you'll notice there are 2 red alphas down there. I'll get to those in a moment. But our stem is still the same. It's still graf. But now we're going to take these new endings and snap them on there. And we wind up with grafome, grafese, grafete, grafomaste, grafosaste, grafonde. And these are, as the name of the grammar tells us, these are passive. I am being written. You are being written. The most common one, grafete, is written or is being written. So if you wanted to ask, hey, how is this written? You would say pos grafete. Okay, now let's take a closer look at this part here. You can see that the alpha in the active voice is the same in graf, and all of them have the the accent, the tono or the oxia, as it should be called, on the alpha, and it's there for all six persons. What happens down in the passive voice, however, is we get it in the beginning and we get it in the end. However, for we are written, graphomaste, and you guys are being written, graphosaste, the accent shifts to the right. And if you can't see it, the reason for that is that these have an extra syllable, and the Greek rules of accenture require us to have an accent on one of the last three syllables, no exceptions. And we'll talk more about that later, and we'll certainly cover it in class. Now let's take a closer look at this passive voice. You can see at the top we've got graf, and on the right side we've got ome, grafome. I am written. Well, if we look at the table at the bottom, and now it's here in blue, let's take a look at these endings because actually we have seen these before. We'll separate them from there. Ome, esse, ete, omaste, osaste, onde. It may or may not look familiar to you at first, but when we bring in the verb to be, we can see that these are almost exactly the same, actually, and the letters in red on the right side are the ones that aren't changed between the two. As far as the left side, there are changes made whenever you make compound words, which these originally were. Also, omicron and epsilon have a unique relationship, as do O's and E's in English. They're often swapped for each other. They're both very weak vowels. For those of you who've studied ancient Greek, you'll also know that omicron and epsilon never take a circumflex, perispomeni. So when we say the word grafome, what we're really saying is write, and it's not a verb or a noun, it's just a concept almost. Graf by itself is nothing. Plus I am. Grafome, I am written. I am in a state of being written. And that's how so many of these verbs are formed. Almost any verb that you have in the active voice can be brought into the passive voice, or something that looks like the passive voice. Now, there are some traps. These cause people a lot of problems, especially people who never really learned how to read or write Greek. And if we take a look here at the blue ones, the blue lines, at the top we have grafete, which means you all write, like you guys write, or you guys are writing. At the bottom, we also have grafete, except this time we have an alpha iota, which means he, she, or it is written. Now, to the ear, there's no difference in modern Greek. A lot of people, especially in Western countries, would say that the bottom one is pronounced grafetai. There's some argument there that's still going on. There's some disagreement about the pronunciation of the alpha iota. But in modern Greek, these are both pronounced grafete. The only way to know, aside from context, which one you're using, is by being able to read it. And the alpha iota should give away that you're dealing with the passive voice. So we have to be careful here. We also have to be careful with these green ones. We've got grafume, that's an ume, which is sometimes said as grafome. Sometimes that epsilon is not there. And at the bottom we've got grafome. Well, grafume at the top is we write. At the bottom, grafome is I am written. Probably a less common verb, although it could sometimes be used for I am enrolled or I am signed up. So let's take a look just to give you an idea of some of the most common verbs that you'll see in this form. And there are so many of them. Astievome, I'm joking. Um, Orkizome, I swear. Ξεκουράζομαι, I rest. Ακούγομαι, I am heard. Drepome, I am embarrassed. Αισθάνομαι, I feel. Uh, we could go on and on and on. We're not going to cover them here. They'll come up through the course of our vocabulary studies, but this is going to make up a huge part of Greek verbs, and we're going to need to know how to handle these when we see them. So that's all there is for now on these middle passive verbs. We'll get into much more detail later. For now, telos.